Hello and welcome back to Atlanta Music Critic. Today, our creator and editor William Ford welcomes you to this special interview with internationally renowned violinist Daniel Hope. A musician of remarkable versatility, Hope has captivated audiences worldwide with his artistry, passion, and innovative programming. Born in South Africa and raised in England, he studied under the legendary Yehudi Menuhin, who greatly influenced his musical journey. Hope has built an illustrious career, performing as a soloist with the world's leading orchestras and collaborating with top artists across genres. He is a dedicated champion of both classical and contemporary music, known for his work in reviving forgotten masterpieces and commissioning new works. Beyond the concert stage, he is an accomplished author, broadcaster, and documentary filmmaker. Currently, he serves as music director of the Zurich Chamber Orchestra, the artistic director of the Dresden Frauenkirche and president of the Beethoven Huse Bonn. With a commitment to musical education, Hope actively mentors young artists and promotes accessible music initiatives. His recordings have earned multiple Echo Classic Awards, Grammy nominations, and widespread critical acclaim. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from Daniel Hope as he shares insights into his career, inspirations, and future projects. Please welcome William and violinist, educator, and musical visionary, Daniel Hope.
Hey there.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm fine. I'm sorry I'm a little bit late.
Where are you?
I'm in West Palm Beach.
I wanted to talk a little bit about you and what you're currently doing. I noticed that you are music director at the church in Dresden.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
How long have you been doing that?
I've been doing that since 2019.
I was fortunate enough to visit that beautiful place. What specifically do you do as music director?
We plan around 35 performances a year in the church, in the main church, but also in the crypt. And we invite guest orchestras and soloists and plan an entire calendar year season. So we're basically presenters there, which is a tremendous honor to be able to go into those places and to make music there and to invite people and have them perform.
Do you actually perform as part of that also?
I do a certain amount, 4 to 5 performances, both in the smaller crypt, which seats around 200, 300 people, where we also have a young artist series, as indeed in the main church, which seats almost 2,000.
Do you live near Dresden?
I used to live in Berlin until last summer, and my family and I moved to Zurich, in fact, last summer. So I now commute there and back, but it's an hour flight, so it's not too far.
And are you still involved with the Beethoven Huse in Bonn?
Yes, I'm the president there, which I have been since 2020. And my role there is, it's an honorary role. I help to also plan a concert series. We have our own concert hall, a chamber music hall there, where I put on a Beethoven fest, a chamber music fest once a year. Plus, I also invite other artists to come and play there in our series. And my role is to internationalize Beethoven and to make people aware of the amazing facilities that we have there. It's really the leading research center for Beethoven in the world, with the biggest collection of letters and Beethoven memorabilia, with 80 scholars working around the clock to preserve everything that we can find of Beethoven. So it's a very different role, but something that's equally rewarding and inspiring at the same time.
Are there still new things being uncovered about Beethoven that you didn't know about before?
Often we will find, perhaps either new manuscripts or perhaps a selection of a manuscript, or we might find a new edition, or as was recently the case, we were able to purchase part of one of his final string quartets, which came up again for sale, which was an amazing thing. So we, on behalf of the Beethoven House, supported by the German government and by the local government, we actually purchased one of the movements of one of his late string quartets to kind of bring it back into the collection, which we then digitalize and make available to students and everybody around the world. So it's also preservation of anything to do with Beethoven.
With regard to that particular manuscript, It's original in what sense? Is it the original engraving? Is it the handwritten?
It's the handwritten manuscript.
Well, that is impressive.
Yes. Yeah, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And it's also an interesting story. Opus 130. And that piece was dissected into movements, and each movement was sold off in the 19th century. And one of the movements belonged to a Jewish family in the Czech Republic, and it was stolen by the Nazis. And when they then fled the Czech Republic, it was then passed back to the then Czechoslovakian government, which then became the communist regime. And it took the family who live in the United States until last year to get restitution. They finally actually got it back. And they contacted us and said, would we be interested in buying it and putting it in our collection? So after 70, 80 years of turbulence, it finally came back to the house in which Beethoven was born. We're also a museum because it's actually his birth house. So it's really wonderful when we have the chance to take the music and his possessions and his bits of his life and put it back in his own home.
It is pretty wonderful and quite a trip around Eastern Europe.
And in fact, even around the world, because the heirs of the family, they fled to the United States where they still live. So, we were in discussions with the American authorities as well. And, we wanted the family to have the feeling that it was, really valued. And the fact that it was going back to a German institution, I think was an incredible gesture on their part that they were willing to do this, given the fact that it was the Nazis that had stolen it from them. So, it was a very moving and very soul-searching coming together of music and history, really.
What condition was the manuscript in?
Perfect. Absolutely perfect condition. You can flip the pages. I mean, you have to be careful because obviously it dates from 1827, but it's absolutely perfect. It's in perfect condition. And of course, we had it examined and then we had it scanned and digitalized immediately so that everybody could see it and access it. But I got to look at the manuscript and to touch it and to turn the pages and to see the ink stains and the coffee stains that Beethoven had, and the way in which he composed, which was very different to say someone like Mozart or Bach, where you literally have the feeling they would just push print in their brain and out it came without any correction or any form of amendment. And with Beethoven was very different. He's changing left, right, and center. He's crossing out. He's sticking pieces of paper on top, rewriting. So the thought process and the creative process, particularly in the late string quartets of Beethoven, it's a science unto itself. So to see all of that next to you and that visceral smell of the paper, the heavy paper and the papyrus and the ink, is an amazing feeling.
Do you have the manuscript on display, or is it kept somewhere, for example, in an archive, and like they do with the Shrouded tour and take it out every 10 years or so?
This particular manuscript is on display now at the Beethoven House and will be, I think, until the summertime. So people can come and there's a whole exhibition about, how the journey on which it went. And then at the same time, already now you can access it online and you can zoom in. And, our custodians have written, fascinating documents about exactly what it is and what to look for. It's very important to us that all of our manuscripts are accessible. Of course, we can't have the originals open to everybody all the time because they're incredibly fragile. But scholars and people who study Beethoven can apply and come and actually sit and have access to it. And I've myself had the joy to look and study at the Kreutzer Sonata of Beethoven, for example, of which we have the original manuscript. And if it's a piece that you're playing in particular, and then you suddenly see it in front of you, it's a really moving and very, very thrilling moment to actually be one-on-one with the composer's thoughts in that moment. There's, no additions, no publishers. It's just Beethoven and just his very singular way in which he expressed himself. And so if you're alone with him in that room, it's really spine tingling, I would say.
Is that mostly in Europe?
I would say it's about 70% in Europe, and the rest is either the US or Asia, or Australia now and again.
You live in Zurich and you work with the Zurich Chamber Orchestra?
I've been music director since 2016.
How many concerts a year do you do there?
We do in Zurich, I do about 10 a year, 10 to 12, and then we go touring as well. And we do quite a lot. So we do usually around another 30 concerts a year. So I'm probably up to around 40 concerts with Zurich.
So you both conduct and perform as a soloist, I assume.
I only direct from the violin. I don't actually conduct. I only take on the concertmaster position, or I guess you would say kind of Kapellmeister. So leading symphonies or leading concertos, I'm doing it with the violin.
Are you still involved New Century Chamber Orchestra?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I've been music director there since 2018. I started in 2016 with them as an artistic partner, and since 2018, I've been the music director. And I do 4 weeks a year in San Francisco and the Bay Area. We've done 2 European tours since I've been there. It's a tremendous ensemble, has a strong emphasis on 20th century music and on contemporary music, and we commission a lot of pieces. And it's a very different sort of animal to, let's say, the Zurich Chamber, but it's again a conductorless orchestra with tremendous energy and verve, and I love playing with them.
Where do you play in San Francisco?
We play at Herbst Theatre, or we play at the Presidio Theatre, which is a beautiful, recently restored theatre on the Presidio. And then we do concerts in the Bay Area. So sometimes at Bing Concert Hall, at Stanmore, or at the Green Music Center in Sonoma, and various churches in Berkeley, Palo Alto. So we move around there. But our base in San Francisco is usually at the Herbst Theatre.
How much playing do you actually do now at this point in your career in the sense of concertizing?
I do about 120 concerts a year.
Is that all, huh?
Production actually for the last couple of years. I had my 50th birthday was 2023, and that was the most that I ever played. I think I did 180 concerts that year, and I decided that was the end of that. I wasn't going to do that again. As great as it was, there was a limit. So I'm back to around 120, which is more than enough.
How long have you been associated with the Polish Chamber Orchestra?
I've known them since I was 5 years old, because there's a very, very strong connection through Yehudi Menuhin, the violinist, with whom I basically grew up and who was my great mentor and inspiration. And Symphonia Varsovia, which is the larger organization to which the Polish Chamber Orchestra belongs, was Menuhin's favorite orchestra. It was his ensemble of choice. And so throughout his life and throughout my time with him, which spanned over 35 years, I was constantly able to listen to the orchestra, to experience them. Some of my earliest memories are with that orchestra, and later on to have the chance to play with them, with Menuhin conducting. So we have a tremendously long association, and I'm thrilled actually that we get to refresh it now. And it's I think the first time in almost 20 years that the orchestra has been back to the United States. They used to come almost every year, and there's been a long absence here. So I'm thrilled actually that they're now back and that we get to reconvene after all of these years. This was the first tour that we've done together really since Menuhin's days, since 1999. So, for me, it's even longer actually. And I think it was just an idea to try and get us back together and see what happens. And it's been such a pleasure and such a wonderful musical exchange, that I think we're very keen to try and find some more things to do in the future. I've also been back to Poland. I've performed in Warsaw with the orchestra. So they're old friends, but new friends again. And it's wonderful to make music with friends and to have people that are on the same wavelength and the same energy and the same goals is very, very inspiring for me. I mean, I have to say, I do love play directing because, it's only possible in certain sizes of repertoire. You couldn't do it with the Mahler Symphony. But with Mozart, with Haydn, with works that are just strings or that have a few winds, plus the fact that we play standing as well, it brings a level of directness back to the music making, which is really like chamber music, but on a grander scale. And I've been doing this play directing now for the best part of 20 years. And I have to say, I just love it. I love being able to be part of a Mozart symphony or a Haydn symphony. And it's very different being a conductor, as you know, where you're giving signals and an orchestra's following you, to actually being part of that signal and giving the lead as part of the voicing. So the players react differently to the way they would to a baton or to, a hand. So it's a totally different level of communication. And the fact that we stand frees our bodies up, and gives us the interaction. So it's a very dynamic way of making music. Nothing against conductors, of course, but it's for me a tremendous energy drive that I get from doing it. As long as I have partners that are willing to go with me at that same speed and the same exchange level, and they certainly are. So it's great fun as well.
Do you ever in rehearsal go, oh, no, 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 we're not doing it that way?
Frequently. Frequently. And I mean, that's the great thing about rehearsal, is it's there to try things out. And, this is not an orchestra, I would say, that's used to playing without a conductor. That's the big difference to Zurich or to New Century Chamber Orchestra. Those are conductorless orchestras. Sinfonia Varsovia is not. They work with conductors. So it's for them, our kind of first sessions, I think they were also having to find their comfort zone, and to respond in the way that giving a downbeat means you play exactly on that beat, because we play together, rather than giving, downbeat from a baton is interpretation as to where you then come in and where the conductor wants to bring you in. So there were moments where we had to find the like-minded signals to communicate, but they're so fast and they're so musical, and they love doing it. I can see it, I can relate to it. So those moments were few and far between.
Do you notice the difference between audiences in the various places that you travel?
Very much so, yeah. I mean, every audience is different, but even the audiences in the same town could be different on a different night, on a given experience. But yes, you do. And I do find a difference between performing, let's say, in the US to performing in certain countries in Europe or Japan or South America. It's very difficult to generalize, because, again, you can be surprised by a particular audience on a particular night. But mostly, most of the experiences are pretty much accurate as to where you are going to be. Again, it depends on the room, it depends on the crowd, it depends on the performance that you're sharing the stage with, and the repertoire you're playing. No concert is the same, but there are big differences in certain cultures and certain countries. South America, I remember going on stage at the Teatro Colón in Buenos Aires, and literally walking on, and you hadn't played a note yet, and it felt like you'd scored a goal for the local football team. I mean, it just, there was an eruption of sound and emotion. It was absolutely extraordinary. I'd never experienced anything like that. So it's really different wherever you're going to be. But I would say, as far as the US is concerned, and I play a lot in America, there's a great level of enthusiasm in the concert hall and in the audiences here. And that's something which I particularly warm to and respond to. I think it's going to a concert is a positive thing. It's something about positive energy. And I do find in the US that the audiences are, almost without exception, extremely open, friendly, and enthusiastic. And that's not always the case in Europe, where sometimes you have the feeling you have to really draw in the audience and work throughout, let's say, an entire evening to reach a connection. It's different in the States.
I have heard stories of audiences in Europe booing. Have you ever run across anything like that?
Very rarely. I was sitting in a concert, in fact, in the Musikverein in Vienna, in the beautiful Golden Hall. And a marvelous pianist was playing, and he gave a fantastic performance of a Ravel piano concerto, and I was sitting in the audience, and it was a very well-known conductor and a very well-known orchestra, and the audience applauded at the end, and one man got up and very distinctly and loudly booed. And I just remember it was terribly shocking. I mean, firstly, I found it unbelievably rude. And secondly, completely unjustified in any case, because it was a fantastic performance. But the performer himself, I was watching him and I know him as well. He was completely shocked because he was not expecting it. And I think everybody, with the exception of the guy doing the booing, really felt for him because it seemed so unfair and so unnecessary. I know that also from colleagues of mine who are singers, for example, that it's more common in the opera. And in the theater, especially in Germany, for example, that if people don't like the production, if they don't like the direction, that the directors often get booed. I can actually remember going to one performance of the Three Penny Opera in Berlin, which is an amazing production by Klaus Maria Brandauer, the great actor, Austrian actor, and he was directing, and the final curtain came, and half the audience booed and half the audience cheered, and it became like a fight between the two groups. It really felt like, they were going to come to blows, actually. That's the only time I've ever experienced something as drastic as that. I think that people, especially in opera and in musicals and in operetta, they have a very specific opinion of how they think a production should look and sound. And if it doesn't come up to that for whatever reason, that they react against it. As I say, that's really more the case in theatrical performances. Very rarely have I seen that happen in a concert performance or in chamber music. Emotions do run high, and I think particular opera crowds and audiences, they're very used to going to things and they know what they like. And if they don't like it, then they display their displeasure with it. But it's fortunately not something that most instrumentalists in symphonic concerts really ever have to experience.
Have you ever been involved in recording film music?
Yes, I have. I did an album about 10 years ago, which was called Escape to Hollywood, which was about the composers who fled Europe and created the Hollywood sound at the beginning of the birth of film and speaking movies. And I played a lot of music by people like Niklas Rocha and Max Steiner, but also some of the more famous composers of today, people like John Williams and Alexander Desplat. I've done a number of pieces, and I'm a huge film fan and lover, actually. And the whole idea of, let's say, a Bernard Herrmann score for Hitchcock, examining that. I've even played Psycho, actually, with Zurich. We've done it as the orchestra, a live orchestra to the film itself. And that was taking it to another level, actually. There you realize you are actually creating some of that tension through this brilliant music of Bernard Herrmann. But the way in which it's placed in the film is just amazing. And so if you're actually doing it to the pictures, that's something that was just unforgettable for me.
You're doing the Haydn violin concerto. There are only 3 Haydn violin concertos extant?
Yes, and we're not even sure, in fact, if one of those is actually Haydn or not. But I'm doing the G major, which is just a beautiful, beautiful piece and has one of the most gorgeous second movements, and is pure Haydn. It has that tremendous construction. The architecture is just perfection, yet it has charm and wit and humor and understatement, but also very brilliant. It kind of encapsulates everything as a kind of a precursor to somebody like Mozart. But we also have the Passione, the Passion Symphony of Haydn, which has always been one of my favorite, which is such an extraordinary piece, so dark and brooding and non-compromising, actually, and very different to so many of Haydn's symphonies. So we have the kind of light and darkness of Haydn in this program, which is also something I do enjoy very much, kind of savoring.
Why are there so few Haydn violin concertos?
The violin concerto was really just being born in that time, and it was not necessarily the piece that was the most popular art form, let's say, at the court of Esterhazy. Although there was a great violinist there for whom Haydn wrote, I think that the symphony was really something that was more engaging in terms of impressing the audience there, as well as the royalty who had commissioned these pieces. So I think it was just a question of fashion, probably, that Haydn didn't feel that he could get as much out of it at that particular time. Of course, it's a shame for us because we would have loved to have more. And yet, the pieces that he's written, in particular the C major, I absolutely love. I think that's a real masterpiece. And again, it shows Haydn in the earlier stages of his life, where everything comes with such ease and such poignant elegance. But then, if you look at Mozart and the violin concertos, it's another level. He's taken some of the ideas and the inspiration of Haydn, and he's gone as he always did, his own way, his own route, and taking the risks all the time that Mozart did. And there you see the change in the violin concerto itself. It becomes something that it never was. And Mozart was instrumental in that. So in a way, I kind of think Haydn perhaps was even waiting for someone like Mozart to come along to develop that. You know, he famously said to Leopold Mozart, Mozart's father, "Your son is the most talented composer I've ever experienced, I've ever seen." And those were words of high praise by one of the most famous composers in Europe. No composer could make a living without having the blessing of Haydn. But for Haydn to go out onto a limb and to express such an adoration of the young Mozart was unheard of. And so I think he felt that this young genius was going to come, whatever happens, and develop his own forms. And certainly Mozart did that in the piano concerto and the violin concerto. He took it to unknown heights.
One of my favorite composers, Kilar, is on the program. He's not well known, I think, in the US, certainly more well known in Poland, but his music is pretty wonderful.
It's unbelievable. And Orava, I'm sure you know it if you like Kilar. I mean, this is just one of my favorite pieces of all time. And I wanted to have a piece that was connected to the orchestra, that was connected to Poland. And this piece was actually written for the Polish Chamber Orchestra. So it's their piece. And they play it just stunningly. It's incredible. I mean, I played it a lot with a lot of great orchestras. But getting into that mindset, it was like just jumping on the train. I could see it there, it was going, and I saw my opportunity to go for it and jump in there. And I just let myself be taken away by the sound and the fantasy and the energy that they bring to it, the folky kind of juxtaposition, the kind of edgy chords, the swing, and the sort of repetitive nonchalance that piece has. And they play it so wonderfully. And so it's even though it's rather maybe unusual to have it in between, you know, Mozart and Haydn and Gluck. We played it last night here in Florida, and the audiences they loved it. They really responded to it, which I was happy to see, because you never know, of course, you know, how a piece of 20th century music will connect to an audience or not. But the way they play it it's so authentic that it's inescapable, actually.
Minimalist is becoming much more a part of things that we hear all the time.
There are certain pieces that people they feel very drawn to for certain reasons. And, you know, whether it's Philip Glass or Arvo Pärt, or in fact, Wojciech Kilar, I think this Orava is up in that category of really once in a lifetime experiences of minimal music. Many of those composers have also composed for film, as indeed has Kilar. And I think there's something about the soundscape idea which relates to audiences, particularly now where, you know, visuality is such an important part of our world.
Is there anything else that you would like to cover?
I'm very, very happy when I come back to Georgia, because, you know, I spent 16 years at the Savannah Music Festival, where I was part of organizing the classical and the chamber music there. And so, you know, that part of the world has always been very, very special to me. And so I can't wait to be back in Atlanta, bring this program. It's a great hall. We've been there before. I look forward to returning there and to sharing this vision, this Mozart journey of Mozart with the audience in Georgia.
Thanks, William, for another great conversation. It's been fascinating exploring with Daniel his role as music director at Dresden's Frauenkirche and his deep commitment to historical preservation through the Beethoven House. We also enjoyed his discussion of his leadership with the Zurich and New Century Chamber Orchestras. His return to the U.S. with the Polish Chamber Orchestra is particularly exciting, marking a reunion with musicians he's known since childhood. And of course, his passion for film music and his deep connection to Georgia through the Savannah Music Festival remind us of the many ways he continues to bridge history, tradition, and innovation in his career. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Please support our efforts to bring the best in classical music interviews and reviews by becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/AtlantaMusicCritic. Join us soon for another fascinating look behind the curtain of classical music. See you then.